Hi folks, I'm Joseph D'Ambrosia from LaserMax. In this video we're going to talk about the installation of the LaserMax guide rod laser in the Glock 20, 21, and 41 Gen 4. First things first, because we're going to be disassembling a firearm and dealing with springs, let's make sure we've got our eye protection. Okay, we're going to make sure we clear our firearm. So you're going to take your firearm and make sure you're exhibiting safe firearm rules by keeping it pointed in a safe direction at all times and your finger off the trigger. Go ahead and remove the magazine. Lock your slide to the rear, and then visually and physically inspect that there's no ammunition in the firearm or anywhere around you while manipulating the weapon. Okay, when we verify we're clear, go ahead and send the slide forward and dry fire your weapon. You're going to take down the firearm in accordance with your manual. And from here, we're going to make our first actions on the frame assembly. So coming down in the frame assembly, there's a few parts we're going to have to change. And in your kit, you'll find a tool, a disassembly tool. It looks like this. And this tool, you're going to take the frame assembly in one hand, and you're going to locate your slide lock and your slide lock spring. You're going to use the tool to depress the slide lock spring, and then tip the frame sideways to let the slide lock fall out of the weapon. Take your tool, and if you come in here, you're going to go to the bottom portion of the spring. You'll see a small gap where this tool will fit inside. Slide underneath and press up on the slide lock spring, which will bring the spring out of the weapon here. Go ahead and take the factory spring and set that aside, and you're going to take the LaserMax supplied slide lock spring, use in replacement. Now the LaserMax slide lock spring and the factory slide lock spring, there's a difference you'll note here. The LaserMax supplied spring has a small divot in the front portion here of the spring assembly, and that's for the slide lock activation of the LaserMax guide rod laser. So go ahead and make sure you've grabbed the LaserMax supplied slide lock spring. You're going to locate that channel where you remove the spring inside your frame, and go ahead and rest the portion with the small inlet facing you, and rest the elongated portion into the channel respective in the frame. Take your tool, make sure you press near the bend, not on the divot portion, and press straight down into the frame, resting the slide lock spring in place. You're then going to take your LaserMax supplied slide lock, and you'll notice this is slightly elongated, and there's two yellow tabs on one side of the slide lock, on each end on one side of the slide lock. Those two yellow tabs are going to face you, the shooter, when you're handling the weapon, and that'll be your activation. Okay, so you're going to take this, you're going to place this in halfway into the frame, making sure not to go underneath the slide lock spring. You're then going to take your tool and depress the slide lock spring, then slide the slide lock all the way through so that the slide lock goes over top of the slide lock spring. From here, you'll see that you can toggle from left to right. This is how you're going to activate the guide rod laser. So once you've installed these two parts here, your frame assembly installation is complete. Go ahead and set your frame aside. And then we're going to move on to the slide assembly. With your slide assembly, go ahead and set down on the table, making sure the guide rod and guide rod spring are facing up, and you're going to take your hand over top of the guide rod and guide rod spring to make sure that we don't send those flying. Depress the guide rod in and pull the assembly from the weapon. You're then going to notice a small spacer inside your kit. The spacer has two separate sides, a small diameter and a large diameter. The small diameter of the spacer is going to go into the front portion of your slide assembly. So go ahead and it'll help you to keep the slide assembly facing slightly upward. Take the small diameter and rest it in the hole at the front of the slide assembly, and then carefully set this down to make sure you don't drop that spacer out of position. Take your guide rod assembly, and you'll notice on the red rubber end cap, there's a small triangular portion with a brass contact and a plus sign. That plus sign is going to want to face straight up when you drop the guide rod assembly into your slide assembly. The brass contact point is going to rest right against your locking block. Go ahead and take the spring portion, set that into the spacer, and using your hand to cover the guide rod and spring in case you lose control of it, hold that spring in place and press inward, guiding the guide rod into its respective channel. You're then going to rest the battery cap up against the locking block, again being sure that that plus sign is facing up and the brass contact is touching the locking block assembly. From here, you're ready to put the firearm back together. Go ahead and take the spring assembly in your hand and align the holes in the back of the slide with their respective rails on the frame. Charge the weapon, and from here you'll be able to activate your guide rod laser. That's all there is to it on the installation of the guide rod laser for the Glock 20, Glock 21, and 41 Gen 4.